The sun was beginning to set over the vast golden plains of the Serengeti, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The scorching heat of the day was fading, replaced by a gentle evening breeze, while the last rays of sunlight cast long shadows across the dry grass. Kate Andrews, an experienced wildlife conservationist, drove slowly along a dirt road in her patrol vehicle. Her job was to protect the region's wildlife and monitor the health of the animals. But that day, something would take her off course in the most unimaginable way. A small, motionless figure in the middle of the road caught her attention. Kate frowned and eased her foot off the accelerator. As she got closer, her heart pounded. A lion cub, fragile and covered in dust, lay beside a tipped-over metal barrel. Its tiny body barely moved, and its eyes were half closed, its breathing weak and uneven. Kate jumped out of the vehicle, a wave of worry washing over her. The cub couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. It was dehydrated, starving, and clearly separated from its mother. But how had it ended up here? And more importantly, where was its pride? As Kate knelt beside the tiny creature to examine it, the silence of the savannah was suddenly broken by a deep, rumbling sound that sent a shiver down her spine. A roar. Her head snapped up, and in the distance, dark shapes emerged from the tall grass. A full pride of lionesses was coming straight toward her. The dry grass rustled as the pride moved closer, their golden eyes locked onto Kate and the fragile cub at her feet. The air grew thick with tension. Kate's pulse thundered in her ears. She knew that any sudden movement could trigger an attack. The largest of the lionesses, likely the matriarch, took the lead, her powerful frame illuminated by the setting sun. The others followed closely, their sleek bodies moving in perfect unison. There were at least 7 of them, their muscular forms radiating both strength and caution. Kate swallowed hard. Was this their cub? Had she just interfered in a moment of nature best left alone? She forced herself to remain still, her mind racing through everything she had learned about lion behavior. While lions were known for their fierce protection of their young, it was also rare for them to tolerate human presence this close to their pride. The cub let out a weak, pitiful cry. The matriarch's ears twitched. She stepped closer, her massive paws barely making a sound as she crossed the dry earth. The other lionesses halted, waiting. Kate knew she had a choice to make, and fast. If this was a rejected cub, the pride might attack it. But if they recognized it as their own, they might take it back. Her instincts screamed at her to back away, to return to the safety of her vehicle. But if she left the cub here and the pride abandoned it, it would surely die. Carefully, Kate reached down and cradled the cub in her arms. It was so small, its body trembling against her chest. The matriarch growled, a low, warning sound. Kate slowly, carefully lowered the cub onto the dry ground in front of her and stepped back. For a moment, nothing happened. The savannah was silent. Then the matriarch moved. With measured steps, she closed the distance and sniffed the cub. Kate held her breath. Everything depended on what happened next. The lioness exhaled heavily through her nose, then let out a short, guttural sound. Instantly, the other lionesses moved in. One of them gently nudged the cub with her nose. Another licked its head, her rough tongue brushing against its fur. The cub let out another weak cry, but this time, it wasn't one of distress. Kate exhaled, hardly believing what she was witnessing. The pride was accepting the cub. But just as relief began to wash over her, another sound sent a fresh wave of fear through her chest. From the distance, another roar. A male lion was approaching, and he was getting closer. A deep, earth-shaking roar echoed across the plains, sending a jolt of fear through Kate's body. She knew exactly what that sound meant. A male lion was coming. The pride immediately reacted. The matriarch's head snapped up, her ears perked, and her muscles tensed. The other lionesses shifted, their golden eyes scanning the horizon, their bodies forming a protective semicircle around the cub. Kate's heart pounded. Male lions were unpredictable. If this was the cub's father, he might accept it. But if he was an outsider, he could see the cub as a threat and kill it instantly. The cub, oblivious to the looming danger, let out a faint cry, barely strong enough to be heard. Kate clenched her fists, her instincts battling logic. She couldn't interfere now, but she couldn't just stand by and watch either. Then, movement. From the tall grass, a massive figure emerged. The golden light of dusk glowed against his thick mane, the wind ruffling its dark edges. His body was a fortress of raw muscle, his amber eyes locked onto the scene before him. He was enormous. The lionesses didn't move. They held their ground, their bodies tense. The cub let out another cry. The male lion's ears twitched. His powerful paws crushed the dry earth as he approached, slow and deliberate. Kate could hardly breathe. Would he recognize the cub? Would he reject it? Or worse, would he kill it? The matriarch took a single step forward, her tail flicking. The other lionesses followed suit. They were ready to defend the cub. The lion stopped just a few feet away. His nostrils flared. And then, he let out a sound that sent chills down Kate's spine. A low, guttural growl, not of anger, but of recognition. Kate watched in stunned silence as the lion stepped forward and lowered his head. He sniffed the cub, then nudged it gently with his massive nose. The cub squeaked, struggling to lift its tiny paws. The lion let out a short, deep huff and, to Kate's utter disbelief, began to groom the cub with slow, deliberate strokes of his rough tongue. The lionesses relaxed. The tension in the air dissolved. The king had accepted the cub. Kate's legs nearly gave out from the sheer emotional weight of the moment. She had just witnessed a miracle. But before she could even process what had happened, she heard something behind her. A noise, a rustling in the grass. She wasn't alone. Someone or something was watching. Kate's breath hitched. The rustling in the tall grass behind her was too deliberate to be the wind. Someone or something was watching. She didn't dare turn around too quickly. Any sudden movement could startle the lions, and right now, she was standing in the middle of a fully assembled pride. An unthinkable position for any human. The male lion, now calm, continued grooming the cub, while the lionesses stood nearby, their ears flicking. They had accepted the tiny cub back into their pride. A moment so rare that Kate could barely process what she had just witnessed. But her instincts screamed at her. There was another presence here. Slowly, Kate shifted her eyes toward the source of the sound. The tall grass swayed gently, but there, a dark figure crouched low, partially hidden. Then she saw it. A rifle barrel. Her blood ran cold. Poachers. Kate's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. The Serengeti was home to illegal hunting operations, and she had spent years working to protect these lions from people exactly like this. But what were they doing here? She forced herself to remain calm. If the lions sensed her fear, they might react unpredictably. The last thing she needed was for them to think she was the threat. Her mind raced. If the poachers fired, the entire pride could be wiped out in minutes. She had no weapon, no radio, and no backup. But she did have one thing in her favor: the lions. Kate had seen it before. Poachers always underestimated the intelligence and awareness of these animals. If she could somehow alert the pride without drawing attention to herself, maybe, just maybe, the lions would do what they did best: defend their own. She took a slow, deliberate step back. The matriarch lioness turned her head slightly, her amber eyes flicking toward Kate. Kate didn't blink. She knew she had one chance to get this right. Without making a sound, she dropped to one knee, lowered her gaze to the ground, and in the most subtle way possible, she bared her teeth. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but in the language of lions, it was a warning, a silent signal of danger. The matriarch's expression changed instantly. Her ears perked, her pupils dilated, and in an instant, she turned her massive head toward the grass where the hidden poacher crouched. A deep growl rumbled in her throat. The other lionesses stiffened, their bodies tensed. Even the male lion stopped grooming the cub, his massive head lifting toward the unseen threat. Kate could see the poacher now, his face barely visible through the grass. He was watching the lions, frozen, his grip tightening on the rifle. Then everything happened at once. The matriarch let out a thunderous snarl, and in a flash of muscle and claws, the entire pride charged. The grass exploded, Kate barely had time to react as the poacher stumbled backward, crashing through the dry vegetation in a desperate attempt to escape. The lions didn't hesitate. They pursued, their powerful bodies moving as one. Kate scrambled to her feet, her heart in her throat. She knew she had to act fast. She needed to get to her vehicle and call for backup before it was too late. Kate bolted toward her vehicle, her breath ragged as she fumbled for the radio. Behind her, the savannah had erupted into chaos. The lions tore through the tall grass, their roars shaking the air as they pursued the fleeing poacher. The man's panicked shouts mixed with the sounds of rustling leaves and pounding paws. She yanked open the truck door and grabbed the radio. "This is Kate Andrews. I have a poacher in Sector 4. Repeat, a poacher in Sector 4. The lions are in pursuit. I need immediate backup." Her voice trembled, but she couldn't afford to lose focus. Through the windshield, she saw the male lion come to a sudden stop at the edge of the clearing, his massive frame silhouetted against the setting sun. The lionesses, however, didn't slow down. They were still chasing. The poacher had to be running for his life. Kate's hands trembled as she reached for the ignition, but then she hesitated. What if the lions caught the poacher? What if they didn't? If he escaped, he might come back with more men, more guns. She had to know how this ended. Gritting her teeth, she grabbed her binoculars and climbed onto the hood of her vehicle. Squinting into the distance, she caught a glimpse of the poacher scrambling up a rocky hill. The lionesses were close, but they stopped just short of the incline, snarling. They knew better than to follow where their footing wasn't secure. The poacher disappeared over the ridge. He was gone, but not without consequence. The lions had sent a clear message. This land belonged to them. As Kate exhaled, sirens wailed in the distance. Backup was coming. The poacher had escaped, but today the lions had won. And as she turned back to the pride, she realized something even more incredible. The cub had survived. Kate remained perched on the hood of her vehicle, her pulse still racing as she watched the lions regroup. The male stood tall, his mane catching the last rays of sunlight, his amber eyes scanning the horizon as if ensuring the threat was truly gone. The lionesses, still tense from the chase, paced back toward the clearing, their muscles rippling beneath their sleek coats. Then, as if sensing the shift in the atmosphere, the matriarch let out a low, guttural huff, a signal to the pride. One by one, they began to relax, their ears twitching as they refocused on what mattered most. The cub, the tiny creature, barely strong enough to stand, let out a weak cry. It was still curled near the overturned barrel where Kate had first found it, unaware of the chaos that had nearly cost its life. Kate slid down from the truck and took a cautious step forward. The lions had tolerated her presence before, but after everything that had just happened, she had no idea how they would react now. Would they see her as an intruder, a threat, or would they recognize that she had tried to help? The matriarch turned toward her, locking eyes with Kate. For a long moment, neither of them moved. There was no roar, no growl, just an intense, unreadable stare. Then, in a slow and deliberate motion, the lioness stepped aside. Kate's breath caught in her throat. It was an invitation. Carefully, she approached the cub, her movements measured, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. The tiny lion blinked up at her, its frail body shivering. She could see the exhaustion in its eyes, the hunger, the fragility of a creature that had been so close to death. With gentle hands, she reached down and tipped the metal barrel upright, clearing away the dust and debris around it. This had been a trap. Whether the poacher had set it intentionally or not, the cub had become stuck inside, unable to escape. If she hadn't found it when she did, it wouldn't have lasted the night. Kate stepped back, watching as the matriarch finally moved in. With a tenderness that seemed almost impossible for a creature of such power, the lioness nudged the cub with her nose, then lifted it carefully by the scruff of its neck. The rest of the pride gathered around as the lioness carried the cub away, disappearing into the tall grass. Within seconds, they were gone, silent, majestic, untamed. Kate exhaled, the weight of everything that had just happened sinking in. She had come here expecting an ordinary patrol, but she had left as something else entirely. A witness, a protector, a part of something far greater than herself. And as the distant echo of sirens grew louder, she knew one thing for certain. She would never see lions the same way again. Kate remained standing in the fading light, her chest rising and falling with deep, steady breaths. The savanna around her had returned to its eerie, familiar silence. Only the whisper of the wind through the tall grass and the occasional distant call of a bird filled the empty space left behind by the lions. It was as if nature itself had reset, erasing the chaos of the last hour. But Kate knew better. Nothing would ever be the same again. She turned back to the overturned barrel, her fingers trailing over its dented surface. The cub had been trapped inside, abandoned, left to die. Whether it had fallen in by accident or had been deliberately placed there, she couldn't say for certain, but after years working in conservation, she had seen enough to suspect the worst. Poachers were getting smarter, bolder, and this time they had come dangerously close to an entire pride. Next time, they might not fail. The sound of approaching vehicles snapped her out of her thoughts. Headlights cut through the darkness as the backup she had called for finally arrived. 2 park rangers stepped out, their rifles slung over their shoulders. "Kate," one of them called out, his voice laced with concern. "We got your call. What the hell happened out here?" Kate hesitated for a moment, still processing the magnitude of what she had just witnessed. Then, with a steadying breath, she looked them in the eye. "Lions," she said. "They saved one of their own tonight, and they might have saved me too." The rangers exchanged glances, clearly not expecting that answer. But Kate didn't elaborate. Some things, she realized, couldn't be put into words. Instead, she walked past them toward her truck, her mind already racing with what needed to be done next. This wasn't just another encounter, this was a warning. If poachers were willing to set traps this close to the heart of the reserve, it meant the lions weren't safe. And Kate wasn't going to let that happen. She climbed into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel as the night settled over the Serengeti. The wild had given her a glimpse of its raw, untamed soul tonight. Now it was up to her to protect it, and she would, no matter the cost. Kate drove through the dimly lit reserve roads, the hum of the engine the only sound accompanying the endless stretch of wilderness before her. The weight of the night's events pressed heavily on her chest. She had witnessed something few people ever would, a pride of lions choosing to accept back one of their own, and in doing so, saving its life. It was an act of loyalty, of instinct, of something ancient and untamed. And yet, that moment had been nearly overshadowed by the darker reality lurking beneath it. The poachers had been here. They had set a trap, and next time they might not leave empty-handed. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel as the headlights illuminated the winding dirt path ahead. The reserve had strict protections in place, but it wasn't enough. Poaching networks were growing more organized, more ruthless. If they were willing to come this deep into protected land, it meant they were confident. It meant they had resources. It meant they would be back. The thought made her stomach twist. She had spent years dedicating her life to these animals, studying their behaviors, ensuring their safety. She refused to let greed and cruelty undo everything she had fought for. She pulled into the conservation outpost, a modest but sturdy structure in the heart of the reserve. Inside, the soft glow of a single desk lamp lit the room, casting long shadows against the wooden walls lined with maps, reports, and surveillance footage. Kate tossed her backpack onto the table and reached for the logbook, flipping to a fresh page. She began writing furiously, detailing everything she had seen. The abandoned cub, the pride's response, the poacher's position. Every piece of information mattered. If they had any chance of stopping this before it escalated, they needed a plan. A knock at the door made her pause. She looked up as David, one of the senior rangers, stepped inside. His face was lined with exhaustion, but his eyes carried the same urgency that burned inside her. "I heard what happened," he said, closing the door behind him. "Are you okay?" Kate exhaled, running a hand through her dust-covered hair. "I'm fine. But the lions, they're not. She met his gaze, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. We need to increase patrols. More cameras, more eyes on the ground. If that poacher was here today, others will come. David nodded, his jaw tightening. I'll notify the team. But Kate... He hesitated, his expression softening. You know we can't save them all, right? She looked away for a moment, staring at the maps pinned to the wall. He was right. The battle against poaching was endless. The scars it left on the land, on the animals, on people like her, ran deep. But tonight, for at least one cub, things had been different. I know, she said finally, turning back to him. But that doesn't mean we stop trying. David studied her for a moment, then gave a small, knowing nod before stepping back toward the door. Get some rest, Kate. You're gonna need it. As he left, Kate leaned against the desk, her eyes drifting toward the darkened window. Somewhere out there, beneath the vast African sky, the pride was resting, the cub safe in the warmth of its family. For now. But Kate had made a silent promise tonight. As long as she was here, no lion would be left to die alone. And she intended to keep that promise, no matter the cost. The morning sun stretched across the Serengeti, painting the golden plains in soft amber light. The night's events still clung to Kate like a second skin. The helpless cub, the thunderous roar of the pride, the poacher's shadow lurking in the grass. She had barely slept, but rest wasn't an option. There was still too much at stake. She stood outside the conservation outpost, her arms crossed tightly as she watched the horizon. In the distance, a small group of zebras moved cautiously, their ears flicking at the slightest disturbance. The wild was always alert, always aware. And after last night, so was she. David approached, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. Without a word, he handed one to her. She accepted it with a small nod, wrapping her fingers around the warmth, though it did little to ease the cold pit in her stomach. We searched the area again at dawn, David said, breaking the silence. No sign of the poacher. Kate exhaled sharply, her grip tightening around the cup. She had hoped, irrationally, that they would find something: tracks, discarded supplies, anything to lead them to whoever had set that trap. But whoever he was, he had been careful. Too careful. They'll come back, she said, her voice low but certain. Poachers don't just disappear. Not when they think they have unfinished business. David took a slow sip of his coffee, his brow furrowing. Yeah, he admitted. That's what I'm afraid of. Kate glanced at him, hearing the weight behind his words. They both knew the truth. This wasn't over. The poacher had seen the pride. He had seen the cub. And if he had set that trap intentionally, he might have already marked this territory for something bigger. A sudden crackle from the radio on her hip shattered the quiet. Ranger post to base, urgent. A voice came through, breathless and tense. We found something near the eastern boundary. You need to see this. Kate and David exchanged a look. The eastern boundary, right near where the poacher had fled. She didn't hesitate. In one swift motion, she tossed the coffee cup aside and sprinted to her truck. Whatever was waiting for them out there, it wasn't good. The truck roared over the dirt road, tires kicking up clouds of dust as Kate and David raced toward the eastern boundary of the reserve. The sun had climbed higher now, bathing the savanna in golden heat, but neither of them noticed. Something was out there, something urgent. Kate's knuckles were white against the steering wheel. The radio had gone silent after the initial call, leaving only the deep hum of the engine and the distant cries of birds overhead. She cast a quick glance at David, who sat tense beside her, scanning the horizon. Both of them knew that in the world of conservation, silence was rarely a good sign. 15 minutes later, they arrived. 2 rangers stood near a lone acacia tree, their rifles slung over their shoulders. Their faces were tight with unease. One of them, a younger ranger named Malik, lifted his hand in greeting, but there was no relief in his expression. Kate barely had time to step out of the truck before she saw what had brought them here. Tracks, fresh ones. Deep boot prints in the dry soil, leading directly into the tall grass. And next to them, drag marks. Her stomach tightened. Something had been pulled through here. David crouched down, running his fingers along the edge of the disturbed earth. "Human," he muttered, tracing the deep grooves in the dirt. He glanced up at Kate, his expression dark. They were carrying something heavy. Kate swallowed hard. Carcass, or worse, an animal still alive. She turned to Malik. "How fresh?" "Less than an hour," he said grimly. "We were patrolling the ridge when we spotted the tracks. Whoever did this was in a hurry." Kate straightened, her mind already racing through the possibilities. Poachers worked fast. If they had taken something, an injured lion, a cub, they were already moving toward an extraction point. She scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of movement. And then a noise, a low, distant rumble. An engine. She whipped around just in time to see it. A dark truck, half hidden behind the brush, speeding away toward the outer perimeter. Adrenaline surged through her veins. They were getting away. Without hesitation, she sprinted back to her own vehicle, throwing open the door. David was right behind her. "Are you seriously thinking of chasing them down?" he asked, breathless. Kate's response was immediate. "Yes." She slammed her foot against the gas pedal, and the truck lurched forward, tearing across the uneven ground. Dust swirled in their wake as they gained speed, the dark vehicle now fully visible ahead of them. This was it. For years, she had fought to protect these lions. She had documented their lives, saved their wounded, defended their land from those who saw them as nothing more than trophies or currency. But today it was personal. The dark truck veered sharply, trying to lose them in the winding paths of the savannah. Kate gritted her teeth, pushing the accelerator harder. She wasn't letting them escape. The chase had begun, and this time she was going to win.